Good day folks, Sean here from Air Photography. So this is my beginner's guide for the brand new DJI Air 3S. Whenever DJI releases a new drone, I like to create a beginner's guide to help new users, those who have never flown a drone, get familiarized with the hardware, the functionality, and help them prepare for their very first flight. Sometimes there can be a little bit of anxiety associated with flying a drone, especially if you're brand new. So hopefully by the time you're done watching this video, it'll help alleviate some of that stress that you might be feeling when you're getting ready to take your first flight. So with all that said, let's just jump in and we'll get started. Now, if you haven't purchased an Air 3 yet and you're just looking at the different packages, basically when you order it, you have a couple different options. You have a standard kit, which comes with a controller and the drone and one battery, or you can get a FlyMore kit that comes with the controller, 3 batteries in total, a carrying case, some extra propellers, and some ND filters. If you buy it just with the drone, 1 battery controller, this is the controller you'll get with it. This is called the RCN3. And with this controller, you do have to mount a smartphone in it. And we are going to be taking a little bit closer look at that here coming up in a minute. You can also get this as a FlyMore combo as mentioned with extra batteries. You can get the FlyMore combo with the RCN3 controller, or you can get it with the RC2 controller. Now this one is basically the same. They function the same. The main difference is this one has a built-in screen, so you don't have to worry about mounting a smartphone in it or downloading any apps. It is a little bit more money to get the one with the built-in screen, but I do highly recommend it if it is in your budget. It just makes setting up and deploying the drone that much simpler. So let's take a look at everything you're going to get in the FlyMore combo, and then we're going to take a closer look at the hardware. In the FlyMore kit, you're going to obviously get the drone, and you're going to have 1 battery that's already pre-installed in the drone. You're going to get a controller, either the RC2, which is what this one is, or the RCN3. You get a charging hub with 2 extra batteries, so a total of 3 batteries. And we're going to talk about charging coming up here in a minute. You get a USB-C to USB-C data cable. This can be used for charging or for transferring data. You get some spare propellers, and you get a set of ND filters. On top of that, with the FlyMore kit, you are also going to get a carrying case that holds everything from the FlyMore kit inside. Now, if you purchase just the basic drone kit, you're going to get the drone with 1 battery, which is going to be pre-installed in the drone. You're going to get the DJI RCN3 controller. You're going to get a couple of spare propellers, and again, you're going to get the data cable. Now, on top of that, you are going to get some documentation, some literature with it, but it is very minimal. It doesn't have a lot of information in it. If you want the full user manual for the DJI Air 3S, you do have to go to the DJI website, and you can download it as a PDF, which I do highly recommend doing because there is a lot of useful information in there. So let's go ahead here, and we're going to take a look around the drone. You're going to notice we have a gimbal guard on the front. To remove the gimbal guard, we're just going to press down at the bottom there, and we're just going to pull it away. It's always a good idea to make sure the gimbal guard is on when you're traveling with the drone, when you have it packed in a camera bag or a backpack. These gimbals are very delicate, so you want to make sure it's protected when you do have it packed away. To unfold the drone, we're going to start with the front legs. We just fold them out. And then the back legs fold down and out. At the back here, this is where the battery is. As mentioned, you will have one already pre-installed in the drone. To release the battery, there's a button on either side. You just press and it comes right out. And then again, you just press it in until you hear it lock. On the back of the battery, there's a button. We can do a quick press on that, and that's going to show us how much power is currently in that battery. And that can be done when the battery is not installed in the drone, if you just want to check to see how much is currently in a specific battery. Again, just press on it and it'll show you how much power is in it. That same button is also used for a few other things. Mainly it's the power button. That's how we power the drone on and power it off. Right underneath that, there's a rubber door. There we have a USB-C port. And again, we use that for charging the battery if it's installed in the drone. And we can also use it to plug into a computer to transfer content or to update the firmware. And below that, we have our memory card slot, which we'll take a closer look at here in a minute. And then of course, around the drone, we have different sensors for obstacle avoidance. So let's take a quick look at the controllers. We're going to take a quick look at both of them, but we will start with the RC2 and we'll take a quick look at it here. Now I'm going to take these sticks off because when you get the controller, they're going to be stored in the back. You can see there's little slots that they slide into. So it's pretty important when you have this packed away in a backpack or the camera bag. It's a good idea to take the sticks off. That way you don't end up damaging these gimbals. And then when it's time to put them on, you just pull them out. Both of them are identical, so it doesn't matter what side you put them on. Now at the top here, you can see we have a mode selector, and it's labeled C, N, and S. That stands for Cine mode, normal mode, and sport mode. Sport mode is going to give you the most amount of speed. Normal mode is basically what it sounds like. It's kind of the normal flight mode. And Cine mode is going to slow it down. It's going to slow the movement of the gimbal when you're moving the camera and the stick input, so it allows you to get more slower cinematic shots. Over to the left of that, we have a return to home and a pause button. We can use that to bring the drone back to where it took off from, which we're going to talk about later on in the video. And it can also be used to pause the drone if you have an automated flight going on. You can press that button to stop it. Over to the right of it, we have our power button. And just like the drone, we can actually do a quick press on that, and that's going to show us how much power is in the controller. At the very bottom, we have a USB-C port for charging up the controller. And beside that, we have a memory card slot. Now, it's not necessary to put a memory card in there. Basically, that's used if you want to record things such as the screen directly to a memory card. It does have some built-in internal memory, so it's not necessary to put that in. When you're recording footage or taking photos, all that high-definition video is going to be stored on the memory card in the drone. If we flip it over this way, we have our antennas here. They fold out. Beside that, we have a shutter button. That's how we can stop and start recording or take a photo. On this side, we have a camera button. That's how we can take a photo. Below those buttons, we have two dials. This dial here controls the angle of the gimbal. So if you want to tilt the camera down or move it up, we would use this dial here. And this dial here controls the zoom level, which again, we will take a look at here coming up in a minute. On the bottom of the controller, we have two buttons, one labeled C1 and one labeled C2. These are customizable right within the DJI app, right on the controller, so you can customize them for different tasks that you use frequently. Now we're going to take a quick look at how to power the controller on. With most DJI products, they require a double press input. That's just to prevent it from accidentally being turned on in a backpack. And what you have to do is do a quick press and then a long press. So for example, we're going to do a quick press and then a long press. You're going to hear that tone, and then the device will go ahead and power up. To power off the controller, it's the exact same thing, a quick press and then a long press. So quick press and then long press. Again, you'll hear a tone and the device will go ahead and power off. So now let's switch over to the DJI RC-N3 controller and we'll take a quick look around it. It is very similar. These joysticks are removable, but with it, they are stored in the bottom, not on the back. They just press down into those rubber fittings. And again, both of them are identical, so they can be installed on either side. The button layout at the top is very similar. We have our mode selector in the middle, we have our return to home and pause button to the left of that, and we have our power button to the right. Just like the RC2, we can do a quick press on it and it'll show us how much power is in the controller. At the bottom, we have a USB-C port for charging or updating firmware. This one does not have a memory card slot in it because you're going to be mounting a phone, so if you want to do a screen recording, it's just going to be saved to your phone. Beside this left joystick, we have a function button. Again, that is programmable, so you can set different things in the DJI Fly app. It's very similar to the C1 and C2 buttons on the RC2 controller. Over here, we have a button to switch back and forth between video and photo mode. If we take a look at the top here, we have a dial to adjust the gimbal again, the angle of the camera. You'll notice on this side, we don't have that same wheel what we had on the RC2 for adjusting zoom. That you have to do manually within the Fly app. But we do have a shutter button that we can stop and start recording or take a photo. And unlike the RC2, there are no programmable buttons on the bottom. Now, unlike the RC2 that does have the built-in screen, with the RC-N3 we do have to mount a smartphone. And we do that by pulling out the antenna. And then tucked down in there is a data cable that you need to pull out. You can see right now by default I have a lightning connector on there, so that's going to be used to connect to older iPhones. When you do purchase it, you do get a secondary cable, so whether you're connecting to a lightning port or a USB-C port if you have Android or a newer iPhone, you can easily switch them back and forth. You just want to pull the old cable out and then just insert the new cable. So you can customize it to whatever type of phone you have. To insert your phone, you're just going to slide it into the cradle, and then you're just going to take the data cable and plug it into the port. And to power it on, it's the exact same way, a quick press and then a long press. Now, if you're going to be using the DJI RC2, this will already have the Fly app installed on it. That's basically the companion app that we need to fly the drone. If you're using the RC-N3 and your smartphone, you will need to go and download the DJI Fly app. For an Apple phone, you're going to go to the App Store and just search for DJI Fly. If you have an Android device, you do have to go directly to DJI to download it. It's not available on the Play Store. Now we're going to take a closer look, a bit of a walkthrough through the Fly app coming up here in a minute. And I will be demonstrating that on the RC2. However, if you are using the RCN3, you can still follow along, as the Fly app works identically on both devices. So we've taken a quick look at the hardware. So at this point, we're now going to talk about memory, installing the memory, and charging up the devices. Now, when it comes to charging, it's going to depend on what package you've purchased. If you've purchased just the drone and controller, you'll be using the drone to charge up the battery. If you purchase the Flymore kit, we can use the charging hub to charge up the batteries, or you can indeed still use the drone. Now, one thing you're going to notice that did not come with your drone is a charging brick. You will have to provide your own. Quite often, we already have many of these kicking around. If you have tablets, smartphones, quite often you're already going to have a USB-C charger that is compatible. If not, DJI does sell them. They have a 65-watt charger, they have a 100-watt charger, and there's a lot of third-party ones available on Amazon. This one here is by Anker. This is a 65-watt charger as well, and I do use it quite a bit. So check to see if you have one that is compatible. I would recommend at least a 30-watt charger, ideally a 65-watt charger, and then you would just use the USB-C cable that came with the drone to plug it in. So to charge up the battery in the drone, we're just going to open that back rubber flap. We're going to make sure the battery's installed, and then we're just going to plug it into power. Once plugged in, you're going to see these lights at the back here flashing. That's going to show us the status. And when it's fully charged, those lights will go out. To charge up the batteries in the charging hub, basically it's the exact same thing. We have a USB-C port here on the side, and we're just going to plug it in. You're going to see the lights bounce around a little bit because what it's doing, it's measuring the charge in each battery because it's going to start charging the battery with the most amount of charge first. With this charging hub, it will only charge one battery at a time, starting with the battery that has the most amount of charge. That way you can pull it out while the other batteries are charging and get back up and flying. At any given time while batteries are installed in the charging hub, we can press the power button. And again, that's going to show us how much charge is in each battery. Now this charging hub can also be used as a power bank. So if you've got one battery, two batteries, or three batteries in there, you could plug in something like a smartphone or an action camera if that becomes your priority for charging, and it'll offload some of the power from the batteries into the device you have plugged in. This can also consolidate power. So for example, if we have three batteries or two batteries installed in here that all have 30%, we can press and hold the power button. And what that's going to do is it's going to take the remaining power of all the batteries and move it into one. And the reason you would maybe want to do that is that could potentially get you another flight. If you've got three batteries that are all at 30%, you could move all the remaining power into one battery and get up and flying again. So it's definitely a nice handy feature. And to use the charging hub, you don't have to have all three batteries installed. You could have all three, just two, or even just one. To charge up the RCN3 controller, again, we're just going to take the USB-C cable, plug it into the bottom. It'll signify with these lights here what the current charging is. It'll let you know when it's done. And same with the RC2. Just plug it in, and the LED lights there at the top will let us know when it's done charging. Now, the other thing you're going to notice that did not come with the drone is a memory card. There are many different types of memory cards that are compatible with it. The one I like to use is by SanDisk, and I usually use the Extreme or the Extreme Pro. This one here is the Extreme Pro, and it's 256 gigabytes. So to install it, again, we're just going to make sure that back door is open, and we're going to have the graphics side facing down. Then we're just going to slide it into the memory card slot and push it in until we hear a click. Now, something that's new with the Air 3S this year is that it does have 48 gigabytes of internal memory. Now, that can be filled up very quick, especially when you're filming in 4K, but it is nice to know that you do have some built-in memory if you do end up filling up a memory card, or worse yet, you forget a memory card. The drone will automatically switch to use the internal memory. If you decide you want to put some memory into the controller, but with it, you want the graphic side facing up, and you just press it in until it clicks. So we've taken a look at charging it, the memory, we've taken a quick overview of the equipment. Before we can fly for the first time, there are some things that need to be done. Because when you get it, it's going to be brand new, the equipment has to be activated, and there's going to be some firmware that needs updating. Now, I can't demonstrate that for you because my equipment's already activated and the firmware is up to date, but as we go along here, I'll just kind of give you a brief walkthrough of what's going to happen. Now, at this point, we're ready to turn everything on. When you get it, your drone is already going to be bound to the controller, so you don't have to go in and manually do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to power on the drone and controller. We're going to do a short press and then a long press to power it on. Now at this point, we are going to power on the drone. So we'll do a short press and then a long press. You're going to see the propellers do a little bit of movement there. You're going to hear a tone, and you could even potentially hear a fan come on because there is a cooling fan inside there. Once the drone powers on, it'll automatically connect to the controller, and as you can see here, we now have a visual feed. If this is the first time you're powering it on, yours is going to be a little bit different. When you power it on for the first time, the controller is going to go through a little bit of a setup guide. So you just have to follow the on-screen instructions. And throughout the steps, it will ask you to connect to Wi-Fi. You only need to do that when you're activating the drone or downloading firmware. At that point, you will need to create a DJI account if you don't have one already. It will then prompt you to activate the drone. Once the drone has been activated, it will then prompt you to install the latest firmware. Installing the firmware can take upwards of 5 minutes, sometimes even 10 minutes, depending on the size of it. It'll then give you a confirmation when everything is done. Now, if you come to this screen once you're done activating and the firmware is updated, all we have to do is hit Go Fly. And that's going to bring you into the camera view. This is the main view you're going to be using when flying the drone. So I'm going to adjust the camera angle here so we can take a better look at the screen. And then we're going to do a bit of a walkthrough. So we've taken a closer look at the controllers and the drone, how to install memory, how to charge up the batteries. So we're going to take a look at the DJI Fly app. This is the companion app that's going to be installed on your phone if you're using the RCN3 controller, or it's going to be built right into the RC2 controller, which is what I'm going to be demonstrating on. No matter which controller you're going to be using or you have, you can follow along, as the Fly app functions the same on both controllers. When you power on the drone and the controller, it's going to come right to this screen. This is the live view. And at any time you can go back out by pressing this button here, that arrow button, and that's going to take you back to the main page where all the settings are. If you accidentally exit out to go back in, you just hit Go Fly, and that'll take you back into the live view. Now I'm just going to kind of give you a general overview of what all the information is on the screen, and then we're going to go out for a test flight, and I'll show you some basic operation. So at the very left hand side here, we have 3 icons. This first one is waypoint missions. You can create waypoint missions. Now I'm not going to get into that in this tutorial. I have made a tutorial about that already about 1.5 years ago. I am working on a more updated version because I have made some changes to it. But if you do want to create waypoint missions, that's what that button there does. Right below that in the middle is our focus track. That is basically how you can lock on to yourself or a vehicle if you want to do things like active tracking or a point of interest. The drone will stay locked onto that particular subject. Underneath that, that is our takeoff and landing button. It also becomes a return to home button when you're out flying. Down here in the bottom left-hand corner, we have our maps. We can click on that. That's going to bring up some maps and show some general information about where the drone is located. It'll show us where our home point is. And we can make the maps bigger by clicking on it. That's going to bring it full size. Now, when we're out flying and it has GPS, it'll be zoomed into where you are. It'll show you the location of the drone, the home point, and the controller. And when we go out for a test flight, I'll show you how that works. And it's really important to make sure you have a home point set, because that way, in the case of a disconnection, if you lose connection to the drone knows exactly where to come back to. It will come back automatically all by itself. From this same map, we can also switch it over to compass view. That gives you some information about the orientation of the drone and some other useful information. We can also turn on something called Vision Assist. If we tap that button there. Now, right now it's just black, but what that does is allow you to take a look around some of the obstacle avoidance cameras. So if you're flying forward, of course on the screen you can see what's coming up in front of you, but if you want to see what's off to the side of you, you can enable Vision Assist and it will show you what's beside you using the obstacle avoidance cameras. Now it's just black and white and it's a little blurry, but usually enough to show you if there's anything there. Now beside that, we have all our telemetry. It's going to show us things like height and distance, vertical speed and horizontal speed. So definitely some useful information there. Over on the very right hand side here, these are all the camera settings. Right now you can see we're in auto mode. It shows us our EV compensation and our frame rate and resolution, and it gives us some information about our storage. And we can click on any of this information to adjust the settings. For example, right now if we click on the resolution, you can see we're at 4K at 60 frames per second, but we can adjust it to different resolutions and different frame rates. And one interesting thing you'll notice there is when we put it at 2.7K, It's going to give us a cropped view because when we film in 2.7K, it films in a vertical format. So that way, if you're going to be uploading to social media or to YouTube Shorts, it's already going to be in a vertical format. But you can adjust it also to 1080. Normally myself, I always film at 4K 60 or 4K 30. We can click on storage and we can switch back and forth between the internal storage and the memory card. We can adjust our EV compensation. We can turn it up or down depending if we find it's a little overexposed. The other thing we can do here is tap on auto, and that's going to put it into pro mode. Basically, that allows you to set your own settings such as your color temperature, ISO, and shutter speed. Over to the right hand side here, the very bottom button is a play button, and that's going to take us into the media that's stored on the drone's memory card. It's going to give us a preview. Above that, we have the shutter button. That's going to stop and start recording, take photos depending on what mode you're in, and it will also become a start button for some of the intelligent flight modes. Above that is how we change the different filming modes. You can see when I clicked on it, we got this sub menu that popped up, and it allows us to switch over to photo mode, back to video. We can create master shots, quick shots, hyperlapses, and panoramas. Now, I'm not going to get into all of these different modes in this tutorial. We're going to keep things basic. I have made some videos in the past about some of these modes, and I am working on some updated ones that will be coming this fall. Now, each one of these modes has sub-modes. For example, we're in photo mode, but over here to the other side of it, you can see we can take a single photo, we can do bracketed photos, we can take bursts, and we can take time shots. Same as when we go to video, we can do normal video or we can record in slow motion. So each mode has a sub mode that you can adjust the settings even further. Now beside that, we have the option to switch back and forth between the wide angle camera, which is the 1x camera, or the 3x tele camera. We can tap on that, and now it's going to switch the camera in which it's recording from. And we can zoom in even further by using the dial at the top. You can see as I turn that dial, it will zoom in up to 9 times while using the 3x tele camera. If we tap the 1x camera, we're able to zoom in to 2.9 times. Just keep in mind when you are zooming in, it is a digital zoom, so you will lose a little bit of quality. Now that was using that dial there at the front for digital zoom. The other way we can zoom is by pressing and holding right on the number there. So if I hit the 1x, press and hold, you can see we get a digital slider that we can set the zoom level. And alternatively, you can also pinch. You can do that pinch gesture and that'll zoom in as well. Up at the top right hand side, we have these 3 dots. That's going to take us into the menu system. And there's a lot in here, and I'm not really going to go through it all in this video, but it is a good idea to go through it and familiarize yourself with it. Basically, we have options for setting different camera options for both video and photo. We have some control options, but the one you do want to pay attention to is the safety. You can see at the top here, we have different options for obstacle avoidance. We can have it bypass. So if you do happen to come across an obstacle, the drone is going to automatically try and find a safe route around it or over it. We can have it set to brake, so the drone will just come to a complete stop, or we can turn it off altogether. Here is where you can also set your max altitude. So if you don't want to fly higher than say 80 feet, you can set that there in the settings. And same with your distance. If you don't want to fly more than say 300 meters, again, you can adjust that accordingly. And lastly, every once in a while, you might get an error message that the drone needs to be calibrated. These are the 2 main calibrations here, the compass calibration and the IMU calibration. And right now you can see both mine say normal. But if you get an error message that's saying the drone needs to be calibrated, it's a pretty simple procedure. You just have to follow the on-screen instructions. Now moving along here at the top, we have some other very important information. This first one here is our satellites. You can see when I click on it right now, it's saying no signal. Now that's because I'm indoors. If we were outdoors, that would acquire different satellites, usually anywhere from 17 to up in the 20s. And it's very important to make sure you have a good amount of satellites before you start flying. That'll help with things such as return to home. You'll always be able to know where the drone is. In the event of a crash, it will help you locate your drone. It's a good idea to wait till you have at least 12 or 13 satellites. This next button here is our obstacle avoidance. Right now it's turned off because we're not in the air. As soon as we go into the air, that'll change color, signifying that obstacle avoidance is active. And it's also very important to note that obstacle avoidance is only active during the cine mode flight and the normal flight. If you switch it into sport mode, the obstacle avoidance is turned off because the drone is basically flying too fast to detect any obstacles. So if you are flying in sport mode, you do have to take some extra precaution. Be very careful. Beside that is our RC strength. That's the connection strength between the controller and the drone. The farther you fly, or if there's interference or perhaps obstacles in between the controller and the drone, that signal strength will go down. So you can keep an eye on that to make sure you always have a good signal. Beside that is some battery information. You can see there it's saying we have 92%. And when I click on it, it's going to give us some information about return to home and when it's going to do a forced landing. Now right now it's grayed out because I'm not in the air. It'll adjust once you start flying. The software will keep tabs on your battery level, and it will prompt you to come home when the battery gets too low. It's going to determine how much power it thinks it needs to get back to where you are, and that will be adjusted as you're flying depending on different conditions. Once the battery gets down to a certain level, it will automatically initiate a return to home and start coming back to you. At the top here, we get some information about our flight or if there's any problems. If the drone needs to be calibrated or if there's an error, that will be listed there. And then right beside that, it's just telling us what mode we're in. Currently, we're in normal mode. So that's just a basic overview of the DJI Fly app. So now at this point, we're going to go out for a test flight, and I'm just going to show you a few basics about the drone, how to launch it, how to land it, and how to use return to home. So now that we've kind of gone over all the hardware, the software, we're going to take the drone for a quick test flight. I'm just going to show you some basic operations. Now, before you head out for your first flight, it's a good idea to research the laws in your area. Every country has different drone regulations, so it's a good idea to familiarize yourself with them before you take your first flight. Also, when you take your first flight, I highly recommend finding a big open field without a lot of obstacles, perhaps not a lot of people around, just until you get a good feel of how the drone behaves. Where I'm flying right now might not be the best location for a new pilot, just there are a lot of obstacles. Although the drone does have obstacle avoidance, it's just a good idea. That's one less thing you have to worry about for your very first flight. Now, one thing you may want to consider is picking up a landing pad. These drones sit fairly close to the ground, so when you're going to be taking off from things like grass, and this grass is actually pretty wet right now, having a landing pad can just keep the camera clean, especially if you're taking off from dusty environments, gravel, sand. You don't want all that sand and dust being kicked up when you take off and get on the lens. They're fairly inexpensive and you can pick them up on Amazon. So at this point now, we're going to power on the drone and the controller. So a double press for the controller, quick press and long press, and then the same thing for the drone. Quick press and then a long press. Now at this point, the DJI Fly app should automatically launch. If it doesn't, you can just hit the Go Fly button down in the bottom right-hand corner. So I'm going to set the drone down and we're going to take it for a quick flight. So we've gone ahead and we've powered on the drone. It's ready to go. And as mentioned in the tutorial part of this, we want to make sure we have enough satellites and that a home point has been set. So if we look over at the top right-hand side and we click on the satellites, you can see that we have 18 satellites connected. And if we bring up our map, you can see we have that big yellow H. That means a home point has been set. In order for the drone to come home efficiently, it needs satellites and it needs to have that home point set. So at this point, we're ready to take off. We've done a visual scan, make sure there's no obstacles or people in the immediate area. And there's two different ways in which we can take off. The first is by a series of stick commands. What we can do is press down on the sticks and then push in. You can see that the motors have started up on the drone, but it hasn't taken off yet. In order to take off, we're going to press up on the left control stick just a little bit.
Home point updated.
And you can see the drone now is hovering in front of us. So I'm going to land this now and I'll show you how you can take off a different way. So when it's in this state, hovering above the ground, you can always land it just by pulling down on the left control stick all the way to the bottom. It's going to go into the landing sequence. The other way to take off is by using the button right on the Fly app. You can see we press that there and it gives us an option for taking off. So we want to press and hold. You can see doing it this way, the motors automatically start and the drone takes off automatically. We don't have to press any sticks. Now I'm just going to move the drone a little bit ahead of us just so it's not so noisy. And I'm just going to show you here just how the obstacle avoidance works. So we have a tree there in front of us, and I'm going to try and fly the drone into it. And you can see it's not going to do it. Now, when it comes to obstacle avoidance, there's a couple different things we can set for the behavior when it encounters an obstacle. If we go to our settings and under safety, you can see at the top there, we have obstacle avoidance action. We have bypass, which is what it's set at right now. So if it comes up to a tree or something, it's going to try and find a safe route around it. We have brake. So in that event, if we have it set to brake and it comes up to an obstacle, it's just going to come to a complete stop. And the other thing we can do is turn it right off. Now, I don't really recommend that, especially as a new pilot, but there are situations where turning off obstacle avoidance can be beneficial. It's more if you're going to be flying in a very precise, small location, and that's kind of making the drone jump around a little bit. But for the most part, as a new pilot, I would definitely recommend leaving that on. So now I'm just going to show you a few basic maneuvers. We're going to take a look at the sticks here. Let's start with the left stick. And I'm going to try and make sure I have the drone in there as well so you can see what it's doing. So the left stick has two maneuvers. We can press up. That's going to raise the drone, raise the altitude of the drone. And we can pull down, and that's going to lower the altitude. And as mentioned, when it's close to the ground, if you pull all the way down, it's going to initiate it to land. The other thing we can do with our left stick is rotate the drone. So when I press to the right, it's going to rotate to the right. If I press to the left, it's going to rotate to the left. On the right stick, that is our forward and reverse and side to side. So if I press the right stick forward, the drone is going to move forward. If I pull it back, the drone is going to move back. Now it's kind of going to the side there because it's trying to avoid me as an obstacle. The other thing we can do with it is side to side. So we can go to the right and we can go to the left. And as you get good and you've practiced more, you can use a combination of both sticks to get some really dynamic movements, such as rotations, and you can get some really interesting footage. So let's put the drone out here now, and we'll go for a little bit of a flight, and I'll show you how return to home works. So I'm going to push it out until we're in a nice open area. Now I'm going to raise the altitude of the drone. Now we're just going to fly out a little bit. So at any point, if the drone becomes disconnected from the controller, whether it be because you lose connection, you've flown out too far. Now that doesn't happen too often because this does have quite a range. It's rated for 20 kilometers, but sometimes that does happen. But you could have interference. The controller battery may die and it might lose connection. In that event, it's going to go into what's called a fail-safe return to home. That means it's going to automatically come back to you. The other way it may come home is if the battery gets too low. If we take a look at the battery information, you can see it says we have 19 minutes and 44 seconds until return to home is initiated. The drone is going to automatically decide when it needs to come home depending on how much remaining power there is. Now that will change depending on how far you are out. If we were just hovering close to us, that number would be higher. If you were a mile out, again, that number would be adjusted. So when it tells you that it's time to come home, it will automatically go into a return to home and start heading home. So when you do get that message, it's a good idea just to let it come home. Now you can cancel it and fly it home manually if you wish, but it's a good idea not to ignore that because, you don't want to risk losing your drone. But the other way to do a return to home is by manually initiating it. And we can do so in two ways. We have the button right on the controller here, return to home. And we also have a button on the Fly app. And if I click that, you can see it'll actually give us two options there. It gives us a land and return to home. So we can either press and hold land, and it's going to land right where it is. So if it's a mile out, it'll just stop and land right there. But of course, we wouldn't want that. The other thing we can do is press and hold return to home, and it will come back. The other way to initiate it is on the controller here, and that's how I'll do it for this demonstration. We're just going to press and hold on it.
Return to home.
And you can see that the drone has started beeping. We got an audible notification that return to home has been initiated. And you can see that green line on the screen there. That's kind of a visual representation of the path the drone is going to take home. And the Air 3S has a really advanced return to home. I made a whole video about it a couple days ago. It's really impressive how it works. It can avoid obstacles and get into some pretty complex environments, all with its return to home now, because it builds a map of the environment. So you can see here it comes here. And I'm going to back up because it should come back and land right on the landing pad where it was. You can see it came down to level there. And it's hovering over the landing pad now.
Landing.
It's turning around. And it's going to go ahead and land. So you can see it came back and landed right on the landing pad. So It's off a little bit, but that's actually pretty impressive. It does a really good job. It's extremely reliable. So that's one thing you don't have to worry about. If you're a little nervous about taking your first flight, what happens if you get disconnected? You know that the drone will always come back to you if you get disconnected or the battery gets too low, or if you get lost up in the sky. If you've lost your orientation and you're not sure where the drone is, just hit the return to home and the drone's going to come right back to you and land exactly where it took off from. Now, I've mentioned this in some of my other beginner guides as well, is that sometimes flying a drone, if you're brand new and you've never flown one before, there can be a little bit of anxiety associated with it for your first couple of flights. After all, if you haven't had a lot of experience with it, you're nervous on how it's going to behave, how reliable it is. But once you have flown it a few times, you're going to realize that these DJI drones are extremely reliable. They're very safe. Between the obstacle avoidance, the fail-safe return to home, and some of the other safety features they have built in, they're very reliable, and it's just you don't have to worry about it. So that anxiety will melt away over time. The best thing to do is just get up and practice, learn how the drone behaves, how to maneuver it. I wouldn't worry so much about getting cinematic footage. That will come with time. Learn how to control the drone first, then you can worry about getting all that nice, wonderful footage that these drones are capable of capturing. Well, folks, so that is my beginner's guide for the DJI Air 3S. If you are new to drones, if you're new to this drone, or perhaps you've purchased one of the other DJI drones, I have beginner's guides for all of them as well. Different tutorials and demonstrations. So if you are new to the drone world, you might want to consider subscribing. There might be some videos that I upload in the future that might be beneficial to you, that you might enjoy. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it and found it had value. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you in the next one.